Hello, it is God Jani, and I'm here. As I said, it's Narcissism Week, on the GodJohnny.com channel. And so I wanted to talk about different aspects of narcissists. I feel like this is a very important subject. I feel like millions are being affected by narcissists, whether you are one or whether you know one that is, whether a family member in a relationship. And so I kind of wanted to touch on specific areas involving narcissists. And in this first lecture, I'm going to talk about narcissistic parents. So, narcissistic parents. How do you distinguish a narcissistic parent versus a normal parent? It's very simple. What you're looking for is essentially a parent that gives love and support, but the main premise is it's based on conditions. Okay? A narcissistic parent is all about status. It's all about how they look, and that also reflects their child. Growing up in a narcissistic household with narcissistic parents, you'll be in a scenario where growing up, a lot of the time things aren't too complicated because you're so young and your consciousness is so young, they're not really dealing with a lot of battles. You haven't developed your personal identity yet. So the way that plays out is, the parents doing whatever she does, the kids going to school, going to daycare, whatever. You know what I mean? As the kid begins to come of age, let's say maybe even high school, a lot of kids develop their identity and are very strong with their identity even in middle school. So let's say whenever that time happens between middle school up to high school, you'll begin to see little thwarts of narcissistic situations where the parent becomes very controlling, where the parent becomes very upset that you didn't do something that they expected you to do. It's almost like they begin to have a cognitive dissonance or a confusion as to why you're wanting to do things your way. But it's kind of hard to tell because in those years of middle school and high school, you're still in a scenario where you're still under your parents' control. So a lot of these things that may seem very controlling, a lot of the time people look at it and be like, they're just being a parent. So, as a kid, you're not thinking too much about it. You're like, okay, all my friends are having a hard time with their parents. Because during that time, you're trying to gain independence, but you're still too young a bit. You know what I mean? So that's fair, right? Now, as you get closer to the age of 18, as you begin to get ready to maybe leave the house or begin to want to hang out with your friends and do the things that you're interested in, and you begin to develop more of your identity, that's where a big problem happens now. This is a lot of the time where these narcissistic tendencies of the parent begin to become more apparent to the child. You'll begin to see them get very upset and very hurt when you don't do simple things like, say they wanted you to watch somebody, say they wanted you to come to an event, and let's say you don't go, or let's say you're not there at the exact time that they wanted you. What you get is this kind of response, and the response is subtle. It's a response of extreme disappointment. So let's say you're a kid that's a solid child. You're going to school, you're learning, or you work every day, or you're working very hard. The way you'll begin to notice major signs of narcissism is, say that you don't do one thing right, or you don't show up on time to an event, or you don't do something that the parent really thinks you should value. What you'll get is this extremely disappointed response from the parent. It will almost feel like you did something just completely awful. Like, wow, did I just go to jail or something like that? Did my parent have to pick me up at a jail? Or what you're noticing is you're getting an extreme response to things that shouldn't be considered that extreme. So what's beginning to happen is you're beginning to see that your parents are judging you on a level that isn't very normal. You see, a lot of parents judge their children and are disciplinaries to their children as they get older, but a lot of parents begin to fall back. The normal parent is like, okay, they're doing their own thing. The normal parent can deal with their child making mistakes and still be there to help or still be there to understand. What's different about a narcissistic parent is that there is no understanding. You see, you're looked at as a degenerate for these things that you're doing that don't agree with what they think you should do. So as time goes on, you might have these little friction moments, but a lot of the time the child is like, okay, maybe it was me, I got to get it together, or I'm sorry, maybe it's me. So during this time, the child is still going through a process where they're still, thinking, okay, she's just my parent. Maybe she's disappointed righteously. What begins to happen over time is as you evolve and grow, you begin to deal with more of these situations, more of this judgment for things that may be very normal. A lot of parents may judge their kids very critically for things like, it could be anything that the child is doing that the parent, I can give you an example. Let's say they want you to do something, they want you to come to a family event, and you don't show up to the family event, or you get there late, or you're too busy. Most parents would be like, yeah, he couldn't come, I wish he came, but whatever, the kids are on whatever they do. A narcissistic parent is going to talk to you and be like, wow, you just don't care. Wow, it's like you just don't care about the family. I'm so disappointed that you didn't show up to this event. Like, I expected more from you. And now this might seem like, okay, but what's going on is a guilt fest is happening. They're using guilt to control and to negatively judge you on a much more critical level. Now, this might seem harmless to some, but what's happening on the other side? How's the child feeling? Well, the child is beginning to deal with a lot of guilt. They're wondering internally, like, well, man, am I really that messed up because I didn't go to the family event? And during this time, he might talk to his cousin and be like, his cousin might be like, I didn't go to the event either. Like, who cares? You know what I mean? But for some reason on your end, from your family members, you're getting attacked and looked at and getting this extra level of grief, of disappointment. Okay? Now, this is one example. Months and months go by, and you begin to get more and more examples of these extreme guilts being put on you from your parents. These things begin to make the child feel isolated. They begin to make the child feel like, is there something wrong with me? Am I this evil? And what's really happening is your parents are putting conditions on their love. Because of their lack of understanding, they're judging you on a level that isn't normal. In most cases, from what I've seen from narcissistic children and their parents, most narcissistic children are actually very successful relative to a lot of the kids around them. A lot of these kids have degrees, are doing things that they really care about, are very passionate about the things they're doing in their life. But their parents are constantly making those things seem unimportant or unimportant, because every little mistake the child makes, the parent is adding this extra level of grief and judgment to the child, totally disregarding all the accomplishments and good things that the child does. So what this begins to do is create a mental schism, a mental cognitive dissonance for the child, because they're working hard, they're building and developing themselves, they're trying to make their parents happy. But then when they make mistakes, they're getting this level of judgment and disappointment from the parent that makes them feel very worthless. That makes them feel like, wow, like nothing I do works, And what's really going on is the narcissistic parent is imposing their control. When that child didn't go to that event, it was not that big of a deal, to be honest, but it was to the narcissistic parent, because the narcissistic parent expects the child to be at the event if they say to be at the event. You see? If you don't do what the narcissistic parent wants you to do, even when you're at the age now where you can do the things that you want to do, they begin to project and create these narratives where you're just such an awful child, where you're just such a horrible child. This is a very selfish mentality, because a lot of the time, the child doesn't judge the narcissistic parent at that level. There may be moments where the narcissistic parent couldn't deliver or be there or be helpful, but we're not judging the parent that harshly. But the parent judges the child so critically that it begins to eat away at the child's self-dignity. You see what I'm saying? What it's doing is it's making the child feel like they're worthless. Because if you can't make your mother or father happy, think about it. These are the people that you grew up with from the beginning. When they are disappointed, it affects you differently. You can't really escape that disappointment compared to the disappointment of maybe letting a coworker down. But here's the funny thing. Because the narcissistic parent tends to attack the empathic child, the child who's creative, the child that actually has a heart, What happens is this child begins to grow up carrying this baggage of not wanting to disappoint people. So how does this play out in life for the child? He goes out into the world. His teacher's mad at him. And he doesn't have, some kids around the class don't care. They're like, whatever, I'm going to do what I do. But this narcissistic, or the child of the narcissist begins to feel super hurt that he's not making his teacher happy. They then move up into college. This empathic child grew up always wanting to keep his parent happy. Now when he doesn't get the perfect grade in class, or when he's at a job and they're disappointed with, it creates a situation where the narcissistic child is always fighting and doing extra and essentially going outside of themselves to feel worthy, because growing up, the things that they did were never enough. This then leaks out into the real world where we deal with relationships, friends. They begin to do, go the extra mile to make friends happy. They begin to go the extra mile to make their coworkers happy. They begin to go the extra mile to make their relationship partners happy, right? And in a way, it could seem harmless, like it's good to go the extra mile. But what they keep on noticing is they keep going the extra mile, and their coworkers, their partners, and their friends continue to not value them on a certain level, because they're beginning to create a pattern that they're never enough and that they always do extra. And now the people around them expect them to do extra. It creates a situation where they have a lack of self-respect and self-worth, essentially. And it all began with that mother or that father who never felt like their kid was doing enough. They were exceeding in school. They were creating their own projects and arts and crafts, and they were being exceptional kids to the outside world. But when they came home, their mother and father was like, why didn't you clean the dishes? Or why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? It's always something that's not good enough. Oh, well, you know that he did this, you should try to do that. You see, it's a manipulation that's meant to control the child and always keep the child in a loop where his life purpose is to make the parent happy. And the way this ends up playing out is also they end up living a life to make their partner happy. They end up living a life to make their job happy. But they never developed a pattern of doing what was necessary to make themselves happy. So this is what we see from the narcissistic parent. Control. And then the worst part is when the child tries to reach out. When the child tries to reach out to other family members and say, can you hear me out? Guess what? The narcissistic parent's web of control is so powerful that before the child can get that love from the aunt or the uncle or the cousin, those cousins and aunts have already heard the parent's narrative. Yeah, he's always trying to reach out, he's so weak. Or yeah, he doesn't have his stuff together. Or he doesn't have his life together and he's always. So by the time you talk to that aunt or that outlet, guess what? They don't really empathize with you, because they're sitting there looking at you through the filter that the narcissistic parent created. So they're saying, okay, he's reaching out or she's reaching out to me, but I already know that they don't have their school stuff in order. I already know they don't have their life in order. So they're just trying to get me to care for them too. So what's happening is they're isolating you. The people that you thought you could reach to, the friends and family, are beginning to even doubt you, because this narcissistic parent has done such a wonderful job creating an image of being so righteous and creating an image of the child being so reckless. This is manipulation at its finest. Okay? This is reality altering. This is a very high science that these narcissists do, if you understand spirituality. They're essentially controlling the narrative and putting the child in a situation where their reality doesn't matter, where their reality isn't being reflected back to them. Everywhere they go and turn for understanding, people are turning the other cheek. People aren't understanding where the child is coming from, because when they see the narcissist parent's life is great. The narcissist parent has their stuff together. The narcissist parent is such a loving, kind person, because that's what they project. So they couldn't imagine that they would actually isolate their child like that. Well, guess what? They do. So I'll end here because I'll talk about more specifics, but begin to understand that when it comes to the narcissistic parent, it's all about manipulation, control, and projection. It's all about projecting how they see the world on the environment and making sure that anybody, especially the child, but anybody that's going against that, okay, will be isolated and reprimanded and thrown to the side. Here's the last thing I'll say about narcissistic parents before I go. The key factor about narcissistic parents that will shock a lot of people is their ability to completely take away love when the child decides to go about things their own way or when the child makes mistakes. Conditional love, especially from a parent, is massive. Because when you grow up with a parent, this is the first person that you connect to, the first person you confide in. So when you begin to be in a situation where your own parent, the one that's supposed to love you the most and care for you the most, completely withdraws their love and attention and affection from you because you're making simple mistakes or simple choices that other kids make, that leaves the child in such a painful, isolated space because the person they looked up to for their life, who they confided to for wisdom and guidance and unconditional love, they ended up finding out that even that person can leave you in the dark. So what does that do to that child when they go out into the world and deal with relationships and people like that? They begin to not believe in that unconditional love. They begin to feel like if I mess up here or there, I'll have nobody because my own mother or father left me when I made a mistake. You understand how wrong this is? A parent should always be there for their child, should always try to understand their child. Your child is growing up in a world where they don't have all the answers. They're trying to figure things out. No one is perfect. So when you take your attention away from your child because of these mistakes, you're acting very foolishly, and what actually happens is you're beginning to be the child. Most narcissistic parents or children of narcissistic parents have a relationship as they get older where they're the parent and their parent is the child. It's a very twisted, it's like a dichotomy or how can I say it? It's I'm looking for the word, but essentially it's something where, it's backwards. The love you're expecting from your parent, you have to be the bigger person. And the word I was looking for was a paradox. It's a paradox. Because the person you're looking to be the more mature person and understand your faults, you're finding yourself having to be the one to understand their faults because they can't see outside of themselves. This is the reality that, narcissistic parents with their empathic children in a lot of cases are experiencing. So I wanted to put this out there. I want you to know that you should not compromise yourself for these children growing up with narcissistic parents. You should understand that you're growing up in an environment that isn't right, that isn't fair. And no, all parents are not like this, okay? I know a lot of people who have made all kinds of mistakes, okay, and their family is still supporting them and still saying, hey, we're gonna get through it. Because that's how real family is supposed to be. But in the narcissistic house, that's not how it works. It's their way or the highway. It's their way or you are worthless to them, okay? So understand that this is a reflection of the weakness of the narcissistic parent. And all the job is of the empathic child or the child growing up with this narcissistic parent is to begin to regain their power. The process of regaining their power. So that they can rise to a level of self-sufficiency, self-love, self-care, okay? And self-power, personal power. That they don't need to go outside of themselves for love any longer. So for all of those people with narcissistic parents, look at this as an opportunity for you to become more powerful, much stronger, okay? And as an opportunity to develop the personal power that you need, okay? So that those narcissistic parents have to look back and be so upset that they ended up having a child that they tried to destroy, and this child actually ended up being exceptional. Because that's the truth. The only power they have is the power you give them. Withdraw that care that you care so much for them and begin to learn from them. And realize that you will shine and rise and live better as long as you withdraw from that toxic environment. Okay? It's time for you to regain your personal power. And it's time for you to no longer deal or compromise with narcissistic parents because they don't deserve your attention. They don't deserve your affection. They don't deserve your care anymore. Okay? So with that being said, I hope you learned a lot. That is, in a nutshell, the narcissistic parent. That is the experience of being with a narcissistic parent. In a nutshell, I said, because trust me, when you're in it, I can imagine it's much worse, okay? But that's just to put some consciousness out there about it, and I hope you learned a lot. I have more videos coming up, and I hope you learn from those as well. If you have any questions, or if you would like any coaching to deal with narcissistic parents, or knowing how to break free and regain your personal power, let me know. You can visit godjani.com and book a consultation. Outside of that, thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.